Hi there everybody, in this video we are looking at osmoregulation. So osmoregulation is the control of the water potential of body fluids. And the way that the body does this, the way the body controls the water potential is by controlling what happens in the kidney. So here is our nephron, so we're starting off here with our Bowman's capsule coming through the leaf of Henle, and then at the end here we have our collecting duct. So if the body is trying to control the water potential of bodily fluids, the way that it does that is by controlling how much water is reabsorbed from the collecting duct back into the body. The way that it's able to do that is by using a hormone called ADH. So ADH is a peptide hormone. And if we have a look at just an overview of how it works. So what we've got here, this is our collecting duct. So here is the filtrate in the collecting duct, and then here we've got the walls of the collecting duct. And then next to the collecting duct, there are blood vessels. So the purpose of this hormone ADH in terms of osmoregulation is to move water from the filtrate and reabsorb it back into the blood. So if you have high levels of ADH, then you will see large amounts of water being reabsorbed back into the blood. And then what that means is that the filtrate that we have, which then, when it becomes urine, the urine will have lost a lot of water because all the water has been reabsorbed into the blood, and then that means the urine is very concentrated. So we have concentrated urine, and that means that the water potential of the blood has been maintained, that there's not too much water in the blood. Conversely, if the body needs to lose water, so the body there's a high water potential in the blood and the body needs to lose water, then you'd have a situation with low ADH. And when there's low ADH, if we look at the same situation where we've got our blood vessel next to our collecting duct, then the ADH causes something to change which stops water being reabsorbed. So water is not able to pass across, so therefore the urine that we end up with is very dilute. So that's what ADH does. What we need to look at next is how that happens. So we're interested in this region of the brain here. We're looking at the hypothalamus and then the pituitary gland. So in the brain, we've got the pituitary gland, and it has two parts, the anterior, which means at the forward part, and then we have the posterior pituitary gland, which is at the back. So in this diagram here, it's in the same orientation as that previous slide. So this, if this was in a head, the front of the head would be over on this side, so facing towards this way, and the back of the head is over this side. At the top of the pituitary gland up here, that's where the hypothalamus is. So this is the hypothalamus. In the hypothalamus, we have neurons, and these neurons are where ADH is produced. The ADH is produced in the neurons in the hypothalamus, but this neuron actually stretches all the way down into the posterior pituitary gland. So the ADH that's produced in the neuron in the hypothalamus is actually transported down into the posterior pituitary gland. And then, depending on what's happening in the body at a various point, that ADH, which is being stored in the posterior pituitary gland, gets secreted into the blood vessel, and then it can travel in the blood all the way to the collecting duct, which is where the ADH hormone acts. Now, what causes the secretion of the ADH is the water potential of the blood moving away from the set point. In the hypothalamus, not only do we have these neurons, which is where the ADH is produced, up here we also have osmoreceptors, which detect the water potential of the blood. So blood vessels that move through the hypothalamus, the blood will pass pass through osmoreceptors, and those osmoreceptors will detect the water potential of the blood. And if the water potential of the blood has moved away from the set limits that the body has in terms of the upper and lower limits for water potential that it can tolerate, then the brain will then send an impulse down this neuron to cause the secretion of the ADH into the blood. Okay, so now we want to look at how ADH actually works. How does it cause the change in the permeability of the collecting duct? Well, the collecting duct wall is made of cells, and if water is going to pass through cells, then you need to have aquaporins present. So aquaporins in the cell surface membrane of the cells of the collecting duct will allow water to pass through, and then it could pass through aquaporins on the other side as well. So if the idea is to move more water through, so increase the reabsorption of water from the collecting duct into the blood, then the more aquaporins you have, the more water can be reabsorbed. So this is what ADH does. It increases the number of aquaporins in the cell surface membrane of the cells lining the collecting duct. And the way that it does that is because it has vesicles inside the cell which already have the aquaporins in there. So this is a vesicle, and here are the aquaporins. So ADH stimulates the movement of those vesicles towards the cell surface membrane, where they then fuse with the cell surface membrane, and therefore those aquaporins that were in the vesicle are now part of the cell surface membrane itself, which means that we have more aquaporins, so more water is able to pass through. So if we look at that back at this diagram here, where we're looking at, here's our collecting duct, so we're going to be looking at this area here, and we're going to change that so we can actually see the cells that are lining the collecting duct. And in those cells we have vesicles with the aquaporins in them. So when ADH is secreted from the neurons in the posterior pituitary gland, they travel down in the blood, and when they get to the collecting duct, there are receptors on the cells which the ADH binds to. When the ADH binds onto those receptors on the collecting duct cells, that triggers the movement of the vesicles towards and the fusion with the cell surface membrane. So we now have our increased number of aquaporins, which increases the permeability, and more water is reabsorbed into the blood. If the body then wants to do the opposite and make the collecting duct impermeable so that water is not reabsorbed into the blood, then it will just stop the secretion of ADH, so the ADH levels in the blood will go down, and that means that there will be no ADH bound to the collecting duct cells, which means, and then what that does is it causes the cells to remove these aquaporins, so they actually get removed from the cell surface membrane, and then if they've been removed, then water is not able to get through. And that is how ADH works. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.